15 hours, 508 pages, and I finished 0 books last week. I did finish a couple of short stories, but last week was not a big winner for me. This is my weekly video where I wind up my reading from the week previous, and I always have a book or two finished, sometimes 3 that I can talk about, but last week, 0 books. And we're going to talk about that here in this video. I'm Randy. This channel is called The Literate Texan. We talk about literature here, highbrow, lowbrow, everything in between. We're not snobs or anything like that. You know, a lot of the books that I've been reading all month have kind of overlapped, and you're familiar with what I've been reading if you watch my channel on a regular basis. But I've just been making steady progress on multiple books. I've got them written down here, and I'll talk about them one by one here. I may even read some quotes out of some of these. But let's just look at these numbers here. 15 hours, I'd like to point out, is a part-time job, basically. Okay, 508 pages in 15 hours. That's not a stellar page per hour reading speed either. I did a video very recently on reading speed and how to improve it. And I mentioned that I was not an above average reader in terms of speed, and it's true. When you're looking at my reading speed, you're looking at about 30 pages per hour, maybe. 40 pages per hour if it's something that's reading really fast, okay? So here's what I made progress in last week and how much progress I made in it. Dracula is always at the front of my mind because that's the Lone Star Book Club Book of the Month Club pick for October. And it's also a Victorian novel, so you can count it towards Victober, which I am counting it towards my Victober participation. I want to make sure I get my merit badge there and stuff. And of course, Dracula is terrific, but it's long. I mean, it's a good solid 400, 420 pages, something like that. You know, I deliberately spread this one out over the course of a month. So I've read through, as of last week, well, let's see here. That was week 1, 2, 3. That was week 4 last week. So chapters 16 through 20 last week is what I read through. It's good stuff. I mean, the plot is trucking along at this point, and things are getting pretty interesting. Let me see if I've got anything interesting that I annotated that I want to read out loud to you here. I thought this part was interesting. This is where Van Helsing is relating some of the secret origins of Count Dracula that he's learned from a friend of his, okay? Here's what it says. As I learned from the researches of my friend Arminus of Budapest, he was in life a most wonderful man, soldier, statesman, and alchemist, which later was the highest development of the science knowledge of his time. He had a mighty brain, a learning beyond compare, and a heart that knew no fear and no remorse. He dared even to attend the Shalomance, and there was no branch of knowledge of his time that he did not essay. Well, in him, the brain powers survived the physical death, though it would seem that memory was not all complete. In some faculties of mind, he has been and is only a child, but he is growing. And something that were childish at the first are now of man's stature. He is experimenting and doing it well. If it had not been that we have crossed his path, he would be yet. He may be yet if we fail, the father or furtherance of a new order of beings whose road must lead through death, not life. So in other words, yeah, Dracula was a great man when he was alive and really brilliant, but he lost some memory and stuff, and he's been gaining that back. And he's got all the time in the world to gain it back, but it seems as if one of his goals is to recreate himself over and over again repeatedly, so that there are a bunch of vampires, not just him, and he would be the head of them, almost as if he were God doing his own creation. But instead of creating through life, he's creating through death. I thought that was pretty interesting, but it's an interesting novel all the way through, and some of it's pretty scary. It does have some slow-moving parts in it. You know, there are a couple of chapters where they just have a lot of meetings and talk about what they're planning to do, and there's some exposition. But I think for the most part, Dracula's a really solidly paced novel. I'm enjoying it. Definitely going to wrap it up this week. And then the second book on my list here that I've been working on is King Solomon's Mines. This is a book by H. Rider Haggard. H. Rider Haggard invented the adventure novel with King Solomon's Mines. In fact, He wrote King Solomon's Mines because someone bet him he couldn't write an adventure novel that was more exciting than Treasure Island. And King Solomon's Mines is what he came up with. It's about a hunter named Alan Quartermain, and he gets hired by a couple of guys to literally go find King Solomon's Mines in Africa. It's on the other side of a really vast desert. And they have a treasure map, but it's ancient and not entirely accurate and stuff. Let me see if I've got something interesting to read from it, too. I'll bet I've got something. Okay, I like this passage here. There's a woman, a tribal woman, who's fallen for one of the members of the party. And, Quartermain has noticed that Sir Henry, I believe it's Sir Henry Good, is the serving woman named Fulita has fallen for him and been giving him the eye, and he's been giving her the eye back and stuff. And he's a little worried about it because, interracial marriage still isn't a thing in the time that this was written. But Quartermain observes this: there are two things in the world, as I have found out, which cannot be prevented. You cannot keep a Zulu from fighting or a sailor from falling in love upon the slightest provocation. Well, I don't know much about Zulus. That may well be true, but that may just be an example of a little bit of more or less good-natured racism, if you can call any kind of racism good-natured. But also there's some nice, jolly 1880s sexism there too. So, King Solomon's Mines is a lot of fun. It's an adventure novel, and there's a lot of really cool stuff that goes on there. I think for his era, H. Rider Haggard was probably the furthest thing in the world from a racist or a chauvinist, but we are talking about a completely different era then. It was different then, and you see those differences in the novel. So that quote being just one example of them. And let's see, what else did I read last week? Okay, so I started a buddy read of The World According to Garp with one of my favorite commenters here. This will be like the fourth time I've read it. I'm only up to about page 65 or so, which puts me, I guess, in the middle of chapter 2. Garp has just had his ear bitten off by the dog Bonkers. But also, I really want to read this because I think this is really good. Garp's a young teenager, and he's fallen in love with a young woman named Helen. Her dad is part of the faculty where his mom is a nurse at, and they're talking about their glasses, and she says, I've already got wrecked eyes, she said. I was born with ruined eyes. But to Garp, they looked like very nice eyes. So nice, in fact, that he could think of nothing further to say to her. I thought that was just really sweet. Yeah, I get that. That happens sometimes. Anyway, World According to Garp, John Irving, terrific book. If you like that kind of thing, you probably already know about it. If you've never tried John Irving or you've never heard of The World According to Garp, I encourage you to look into it because it's really, really great. It's not a Victorian novel, and it's not got anything to do with Halloween. It's just a buddy read with someone that I'm excited about buddy reading a book with. I've also been reading this book called Grace and Eric's Christmas Holiday Movie Marathon. It's kind of a romantic comedy. I don't want to say too much about it, because I might write a review of it for somewhere. But okay, so this is Grace and Henry's Holiday Movie Marathon. Okay, essentially, here's the plot line. Okay, you got these two youngish people. I say the youngest, they're in their 30s. And each of them have been widowed. Her husband died of cancer. His wife died in a plane crash. And their mothers were kind enough to introduce them to each other. Their mothers are both a part of the same book club. And lo and behold, they actually kind of hit it off, but they decided to be just friends at first. And as they're traversing this new friendship between the two of them, they're also dealing with the fact that they're both lonely and grieving and sad because it's been less than a year. And, the gimmick is they start watching Christmas movies throughout. And it's really cute. It's really witty. It's a real fast read. This is one of the only books that I'm getting over 40 pages per hour on, so I'm real proud of that. I'm also reading a book now called Plainsong. Plainsong is written by Kent Harif, and it's the first in a trilogy. I discovered Kent Harif because I watched a movie called Our Souls at Night on Netflix. And it starred Robert Redford and Jane Fonda. Really, really lovely movie. So I went out and found the book and read the book, and the book was just as lovely as the movie was. Plainsong has an ensemble cast. it's people in a small town living the kind of quiet lives that people in small towns live. You got people who are sick. You've got people who are pregnant. You've got people who are having problems at work. It's all really gentle and dignified. And it's a quiet dignity and a quiet morality that these people show through the good times and the bad times that make this such an interesting novel. I'm not very far into it yet, but I'm really loving it. I'm also reading a biography of Rider Haggard, and it's really entertaining. And actually, I did have a passage there that I had highlighted that I wanted to read too, because I think it says a lot about Rider Haggard as a person. So Haggard had fallen in love at a point earlier in his life, and she wound up marrying another man because he just couldn't make the wedding happen fast enough. Haggard, remember, is the author of King Solomon's Mines. I'm working on an H. Rider Haggard project. In fact, January is going to be H. Rider Haggard month, so we're going to be really, really hitting that hard in January. I'll have more to talk about that in future videos, but Rider, like most people, he doesn't just stop after the first one. So he's found him a woman to marry, and she's devoted to him. And this paragraph reads, perhaps she hoped that, as she and Rider grew to know each other better, the importance of his first love would fade. If this was her hope, she was to be disappointed. Yeah, he held on to that first love for the rest of his life. But yeah, it's just the life story of H. Rider Haggard. It's pretty interesting. He spent a lot of time in Africa in his 20s, which is where he heard a lot of stories and folklore and got interested in writing adventure fiction. Eventually moves back to the United Kingdom, becomes a gentleman farmer, but more importantly, he becomes a very popular and famous author and the inventor of adventure fiction as we know it. So yeah, the biography's fascinating. I'm loving it. I also started the biography of Ian Fleming, and this was almost premature. I'm really excited about Dr. November next month. It's an event where we read spy fiction. Ian Fleming created and wrote the stories about James Bond, but he had an interesting life too, because Bond was sort of an alter ego of his on the page that he had created to kind of be his role model. And then he tried to live up to his role model. And so, by the end of Ian Fleming's life, like Bond, he was drinking lots of martinis and smoking lots of cigarettes and was gambling and participating in lots of affairs. But yeah, I read that he was smoking between 3 and 4 packs of cigarettes a day and drinking 10 martinis a day. So that's not a recipe for a long life. I believe he had a heart attack, his final heart attack, and died at the age of 53, which is why we didn't get more James Bond novels from him. We did get more James Bond novels, but they weren't written by him. Anyway, his biography is really interesting so far. I did finish 3 short stories. They're part of a video that I'm working on about a dozen terrifying tales to read for Halloween. And I read The Lottery by Shirley Jackson, The Birds by Daphne du Maurier, and The Jaunt by Stephen King. The Birds, you've probably seen the Alfred Hitchcock movie. If you haven't, you should. It was the inspiration for all these zombie movies that we've had through the years. Something perfectly natural goes wrong. And that's what happens with the birds in the book. The story's actually, I think, a lot better than the movie turned out to be, which is not something you'll hear me say that often. The Lottery, you probably read it in junior high school or high school. It's a pretty popular one signed by Shirley Jackson, and it's a short one, but it's a little bit of an existential punch in the gut, but not nearly as much as The Jaunt by Stephen King, which is I think it's one of the best short stories that Stephen King ever wrote. I think it's absolutely terrific. So, so you tell me, okay, that's my reading week, okay? Does it sound like an empty one just because I didn't finish any books? I don't think so. I think I had a great reading week. I made a lot of progress last week. I guarantee you, though, by the end of this week, I'll have finished at least 2 more books. If I haven't finished 2 more books, I'm just going to eat my TBR. Until next time, I want to thank you for watching. I want to ask you to stay sexy, and I want to ask you to stay hydrated. I'll see you in the next video, folks.